I want you to think about your scariest childhood memory. The time you felt most alone, powerless, so terrified that you couldn't even move. You just stood there, feet planted, waiting for something dreadful to happen. All of you definitely have different things in mind, but plausibly, there's some similarities, at least in the themes, of what you all have in mind. You may have been in the dark, in your house at night, in the basement, alone up at 3 a.m. Maybe you were sick with a fever. Maybe your parents gave you some cough medicine that made you feel uncomfortable. Maybe you were injured. Maybe you were stressed. Maybe the family unit that had for so long given you comfort and security was falling apart at the seams, and you didn't know where you would be tomorrow. I have wanted to talk about Skinamarink for a very long time. Not only do I love the movie, but it's related to a lot of the stuff I talk about as a content creator, and presumably a lot of the stuff you guys watch. The director and the main voice behind the entire film was a YouTuber. And while I wouldn't exactly pin the work as analog horror, I would say there are definitely some similarities, and at least a little bit of inspiration. Horror on YouTube has spread and flourished in a different way than traditional horror in film. And Skinamarink is one of the, if not the most successful example of this type of horror common to this platform doing its thing and spreading and seeing commercial success outside of just us. In another life, Skinamarink might have been uploaded to YouTube in 15-minute segments. But as a movie, I think it's phenomenal. Though a lot of people either love it or hate it, it was a commercial success too, undoubtedly. Recently, I was looking through some of the theories about Skinamarink online, and I came across a post on Reddit where u/mharrisggg said, Skinamarink is not interested in telling a story or holding a cohesive narrative. Instead, the film set out to create a mood. This is what it was like to be alone at home at night as a child, put to screen. And it did a very good job of capturing that feeling. I thought about that for a minute, but I ended up agreeing with it. First of all, and I know I've already said this at the beginning, but I want to reiterate there are now spoilers for the film coming up. The biggest reason why I agree with that point is the film's ambiguous ending. You don't really know what happens, and I think that's intentional. I will enumerate most of the theories later, but essentially, everyone has one question. Is Skinamarink about a monster? Is this movie about an analog horror esque demon that feeds off the stress of a family, physically injuring them and haunting them throughout the film? Or are we seeing the convoluted imagination of a child with a concussion walking around his home late at night? Now, this ambiguity is intentional. Kyle Ball, the director, was on record stating this. First of all, every fan theory is true and every fan theory is false. Now, coming from someone who literally analyzes short films to make a living, this drives me up the wall. And that's because I want an answer. But even though that need claws at me, I can put it aside and understand that that isn't the point. Deep down, I think that the director has an answer that, in his mind, is true. But it's as much of a theory as anything anyone else has come up with. If there is a monster in Skinamarink, the movie's not about him. There are lots of movies where maybe one of two things can happen, or one person's story is up to your interpretation. Or movies where the ending isn't shown, but you have evidence to suggest that one or two things happened. Skinamarink, though, presents about 10 or 12 equally plausible theories that can exist in tandem with each other sometimes. All of them have relatively the same amount of evidence, and all are equally feasible. Like I said, they can coexist. You can sort of mix and match them. There's a lot of leeway in that regard that you don't often see in movies. The primary thing, though, that I'm looking to do today is explain why Skinamarink is so scary and why, in my opinion, it excels better than any other film I've seen in my entire life at capturing the horror of being a child. I'm going to explain a few well discussed theories about this, and then I'm going to talk about a few of my own original ideas. To accomplish this, I'm going to first summarize the plot. Don't worry if you've already seen it or you just saw it recently, but if you did watch the movie a little while ago, or you haven't seen it and you've only seen people talk about it, I recommend you hang around for this part. After that, I'm going to talk about the atmosphere and why I think it's so effective, and then finally, I will discuss theories about the movie and tell you which one I think is true. Before we begin, I want to quickly ask you that if you enjoyed this video or horror content in general, to subscribe to my channel and let me know what you want to see next. I have all sorts of videos like this one on my channel, but I also explore analog horror and icebergs. So if any of that interests you, make sure to stick around. As always, thanks for watching. So I'm going to discuss the plot. In discussing the plot, I'm going to really focus on some details that explain the theories we're going to be talking about later so that we're all on the same page. The movie begins with a Skinamarink title card as a child hums in the background. A quick note here, Kyle Ball named the movie Skinamarink after a childhood song that's in the public domain. He just switched up the spelling a little bit to make sure no one would get confused when they were Google searching it. The result is this unnatural word with a lot of hard K's. And though it's really just a result of the director enjoying that song and remembering it from his childhood, it kind of makes you think, is that a demon or creature's name or something? Anyway, that's not important yet, but I just wanted to point it out. As the credits continue, we see a low angle of kids playing. There are then a few minutes of shots around the house, and at about 9 minutes in, we see a shot of lights clicking on as Kevin, the main character, wails. What it looks like happened is that he fell down the stairs and hurt himself. He proceeded to wake someone up, who then took him to the doctor. We hear what is probably a garage door opening and a car speeding away. Then more shots of the house, and then eventually they come back. There's a brief shot where the door opens, and it sounds like, to me at least, someone is throwing car keys in a bowl. We hear a masculine voice say the name Kaylee, and this is presumably a dad waking up his daughter. More lights flicker on, and eventually we hear a phone trill, though we don't actually see the father at any point in time. Eventually, someone picks up the phone, and we hear the dad explain, basically, that Kevin is fine, but that he hurt his head. To me, this is a critical detail and adds some fuel to suggest that Kaylee and Kevin's parents are amicably divorced. Like the kid got hurt, and the dad called the mom to say the kid got hurt, but that he's fine. If I had a kid and they got hurt, I would, I don't know, probably say that to people, but I wouldn't feel compelled to call them at 2 in the morning to let them know that it happened. The only person I could think to do that for would be the child's mother. This isn't, rock solid evidence, but it's something to keep in mind. The father also mentions that Kaylee said Kevin might have been sleepwalking, which is another theme that I'll touch on later in this video. It's important enough of a detail that it's the only part of this conversation that's subtitled. An interesting part about Skinamarink is that it has, built-in subtitles, like when you're watching a movie and someone talks in a different language, like Jabba the Hutt. And there's actually information that you can glean both from those actually inserted subtitles, and then if you turn subtitles on like the program you're watching the movie on, and they often say different things or like overlap. It's really interesting, and I'll probably come back to that again a few times. But anyway, what you need to know is that it's an important detail that was intentionally mentioned and put directly in front of your face. After this, we no longer hear from the dad and go back to seeing the house. Kevin gets up and grabs Kaylee. And this is where things get a bit weird. Dad is gone, and we see the first paranormal element of the film, a door disappearing. We see what once was a window, and Kevin remarks, "Where did it go?" As more doors disappear and the kids confirm that dad is gone, they start hanging out downstairs and watch TV. A detail I noticed here that I haven't seen anyone talk about is that Kevin goes to the phone and dials 7 numbers before trying to talk to someone. I find this pretty interesting. This movie is Canadian, I guess. I mean, the director's from Canada and it was filmed in his childhood house in Canada. And so I'm not sure if this would work like exactly the same way where Kyle is from. In both Canada and the USA, our phone numbers start with a 3 digit area code number. But if you're making a local call, or at least in some communities, this is how it works. If you're making a local call, you don't need those first 3 numbers. Within a few miles, you can just put in 7 numbers and omit the first three. So if this is to mean anything at all, which I think it does because of something I'll mention in a sec, Kevin is calling someone who lives close to him. Who else could that be but a separated parent? That's a potential piece of evidence that exists for the divorce theory that I came up with, but who knows? After this, he punches in 3 numbers, presumably calling 911. But no one answers. Kevin and Kaylee stay downstairs. Also, I don't know if anyone picked up on this, but Kevin sounds really stuffy. Like, just listen to the way he talks.
Can we sleep downstairs tonight? Where did they go?
Of course, he's a little kid, and he might just talk this way, but to me, it kind of sounds like he has allergies or something. I'll get into why that might mean something later. The TV stays on while the kids sleep. At some point, Kaylee stands, saying she thinks it's time to get up. I take that to mean that even though she can't see outside, they feel like it's morning. Kaylee goes upstairs and there are more house shots. Eventually, the kids come to find that a light switch doesn't work. At one point, one of them, who I can't make out, asks why mom is crying, which is really weird. The kids start to hear more noises, a chair ends up on the ceiling, and we can tell that they are beginning to panic. Soon after, Kevin asks why mom hasn't come, and then suggests that dad may have gone with her. Kaylee only replies that she doesn't want to talk about mom. Once again, we are staring right at the fact that these parents are separated, or at least the mom is not in the house right now. It's ambiguous enough that there are a couple of potential reasons for this, but at this point, divorce is still just the simplest possibility. Of course, it could mean other things. She might be in rehab, or she might even be dead. Kevin might be too young to process death. Kaylee might be the only one of the two who understands that the mom is gone forever. But anyway, we're going to talk about that later. I'm going to try to not get distracted. The kids watch their toilet disappear. Because of this, Kaylee goes upstairs to use the bathroom. After seeing a doll on the ceiling and Kevin getting too scared to go upstairs, they end up just putting a bucket in the downstairs bathroom. A few minutes pass, and then we're introduced to another major paranormal element. This being a voice which calls Kaylee by name and commands her to come upstairs. She obliges, and this is where we see one of the movie's scariest scenes. She makes her way to her parents' bedroom, where lo and behold, her dad is sitting. She calls to him, and he tells her to look under the bed. I, for one, was absolutely anticipating a jump scare here. But to my surprise, nothing comes. She pokes her head back up, but at this point, mom is now on the bed, and her dad has disappeared. Kaylee naturally seems pretty confused. Instead of calling out to her like she did her dad, she just says nothing. Eventually, the mom, if that is her mom, says Kaylee's name. This is where another critical detail is delivered. The mother, while facing away from Kaylee, says emotionally, "Your father," before being interrupted by a noise. She recomposes herself and then says, "We love you and Kevin very much." Finally, she says Kaylee again, and then, "I need you to close your eyes, please." Kaylee does so. Now, again, and I know I said I was just going to summarize the plot, but I am going to pause right here to talk about the theory about the parents being divorced. I always took this scene to be like the mom announcing that the parents were going to be separated. I feel like in depictions of media about divorce, the way that like conversation, the way the script goes is like your father and I or your mother and I love you very much, but we have something to tell you. And that seemed to me what the mom was about to say. I haven't experienced this myself, but I just feel like we're inching closer and closer to that reality. One way or another, I feel like the mom was about to deliver bad news. Of course, this is a supernatural encounter, and as far as we know, the mom's not really there. If you, for example, believe this movie is about a monster tormenting these children, it seems like it might be forcing Kaylee to relive the initial discussion where her mother announced the divorce, and this is then a form of emotional torture. We're going to wrap up all the theories later, but it's just a detail to keep in mind. Kaylee opens her eyes, and her mother is gone. She turns to the closet, and her mother's distorted voice says, "There's
Someone
someone
here.
here." Then that same voice says, "Go back downstairs." This is followed by the sound of bones cracking and then a jump scare as a hand comes out of the closet. I think it's worth pointing out that there is a theory regarding Skinamarink that suggests the mother took her own life, and the kids came across her body. Or at least Kaylee, who seems to know more about what happened with her mother, did. This comes from the idea that she could have hanged herself in the closet, and that's what the bone breaking represented. If this is then a nightmare spun on by a demon, the kids could be reliving it. Or once again, the demon could be taunting them with that memory. Kaylee goes back downstairs and talks to Kevin, and they decide to move the couch to protect them from the hallway leading towards the voice. Kevin falls asleep, but Kaylee is once again called away. Kevin wakes up and dutifully searches for his sister until he too hears the voice. But not before we see all of his toys defy gravity. He is commanded to the basement where he encounters Kaylee without her face. There are more shots of the house, and one interesting thing happens where the voice tells Kevin to sleep, and his body sort of just crumples. We don't see it, but we hear it and watch his juice box drop right then and there. This is a point of evidence people will suggest when they say that this movie is really about a demon or supernatural entity that can control the environment and these children. Some time passes, and the voice tells him that it wants to play. Kevin is toyed with for a little bit, and eventually, the voice commands him to put a knife into his eye, to which Kevin, presumably, complies. We hear him wail, and we see shots of blood on the cabinet. Some time passes, and eventually, the creature plays its worst trick on Kevin yet. The poor, hyperventilating child makes his way to a telephone, which he tries to use to call 911. We hear a real adult voice tell him that help is on the way, but afterwards, the phone turns into a toy, showing us that the call was fake this entire time. A trick by our shadowy antagonist. Kevin asks if it was responsible for changing the phone, and the voice comes back with an evil laugh, saying that it can do anything. The voice, too, says Kaylee was punished for wanting her mom and dad, so the entity took away her mouth. It tells Kevin to come upstairs, and when he does so, he finds the world is upside down. The demonic voice goads him to keep moving forward. Eventually, the room starts to become an abstract void. and all we see is a dollhouse and a pile of toys. We see another message flash up on the screen, one of the film's few, saying only 572 days. The room grows larger and larger, and the camera moves further and further away from the toy pile. After this, we see Kaylee from behind, but she eventually just disappears. We see the house upside down, and then the dollhouse once more. There are then some photos of people, some of which look like Kaylee, with their faces missing. A doll is shown missing its face as well. In another gripping scene, we hear Kevin screaming, and blood appear and disappear. Some interpret this as the entity repeatedly torturing Kevin and then starting it over. Before this scene ends, we see an off-cantered subtitle that just reads, Mommy. At the end, Kevin asks if he can watch something happy. We see a door, and then a faceless head appear before Kevin in bed, telling him to sleep. He asks this thing what its name is, but there's no answer, and Skinamarink ends. Thank you for sitting through that little recap. I thought it was important to point these things out because there's so many little details for these theories, one-off bits of dialogue or camera changes even, and I think it's important to go over all of them before I talk about it. So you probably got this, but Skinamarink really captures the fear experienced by children. We see this with camera angles, with the longing for one's parents. It's all just very childlike. There's little to no action, no fighting back. The monster doesn't really take on a predominant cultural or literary form. It's not a ghost, it's not a demon. We don't see symbols about Christianity. It's just a personified fear of the dark. Crucially, all of this takes place when the kids are alone in their home. I think Kyle Ball managed to take a feeling and turn it into a 2 hour long experience. And that's why I like this movie so much. It might be boring at times. Yes, it has shots of a house with absolutely nothing happening for minutes and minutes on end. But that feeling from a technical perspective is captured better than I've ever seen elsewhere. I don't really need to harp on this. That's kind of what it's about, and I'm sure you felt that too, at least a little bit. One of the things that I really find creepy about Skinamarink and that just like scared me and made me really sad and empathize with these kids a ton is they did everything right. They were brave. Both of them check on their siblings when they can. Kaylee is, very determinate to get her parents back, like asking, "Where is my dad? Where is my mom?" The boy, who's only a little kid, knows to call 911. They did everything the best they could. They didn't submit to authority. They sought help from trusted adults, but they still lose. Anyway, what I think works specifically about Skinamarink, and really the thesis of this entire video, is that I think all of these scenes tap into the memories that we have from being a kid. Specifically, the memories we have about being terrified. I am going to propose a few of these memories. A few unorthodox reasons why I think Skinamarink taps into your consciousness and elicits memories of you being a child and feeling helpless. That is to say, if Skinamarink scared you, I think I know why. I'm going to avoid the obvious things like, oh, it's a low camera angle and we see Kaylee blink, so it makes you feel like you're in the child's shoes. No, I want to go a little bit deeper. Do any of you guys sleepwalk? It's kind of terrifying. You just spawn in somewhere where you weren't previously, somewhere you don't remember going to. My family is notorious for this. My little brother and I, especially, did it a ton growing up. Sometimes it was funny. One time, my parents and I were sitting downstairs and we watched my brother march all the way downstairs to the dishwasher, open it up, and prepare to urinate. Other times, it was downright horrifying. My brother or I might encounter the other walking around and just being nonverbal or incoherently garbling and just not knowing why. 90% of the time, we just go back to normal. But it was always creepy seeing my brother do that or myself waking up somewhere where I didn't go to sleep. The worst time this ever happened occurred when I was 9 or 10 or so. When I was a little kid, for whatever reason, I liked to sleep with the door open and the hallway light on. No idea why. I think it was bright enough that I felt safe, but dark enough that I could actually fall asleep. Eventually, when my parents would go to sleep, they would just turn the light out and sometimes shut my door. What that meant was there was sort of a timer, like an amount of time I had to fall asleep before my parents turned the light out and the monsters gained a tactical advantage on me. The whole setup really doesn't make sense, especially like if you're scared of the dark, but it made sense to me when I was a kid. One night, I had just gone to sleep, but woke up to some noise. I turned my light on and saw my brother just standing in the middle of that hallway, staring at the wall, completely shrouded in darkness. I called out to him, but he didn't answer. I guessed he was sleepwalking, but the whole thing just spooked me out. I didn't feel like I could get out of bed, and I hoped, really hoped, that he would just make his way back to his room. He kept standing there for minutes, so I started to call his name again, hoping to wake him up. And then he did. My theory as to what happened was that waking up just scared him because when I finally got him out of that trance, he woke up, turned to me, started screaming like a banshee, and ran towards me at full speed. That was that was the first time I had been like jump scared for real, like in my life. Like literally, I saw a hunched over, creepy looking child, and they started screaming at me on a dime and sprinting at me full speed. It scared the living shit out of me. But the point I want to get to with all this is that deep down, I think a lot of us have some story like that about sleepwalking. Maybe we ourselves didn't do it, but other people in our families did. Even if sleepwalking isn't that involved, we all know what it's like to be scared in our own house, which is what Skinamarink nails. I think as kids, the combinations of imaginations running wild and also the genuine lack of understanding about how the house works just leads to a lot of anxiety. Now, of course, I understand. I understand that my house is perfectly safe and I live in a safe neighborhood. I understand that it makes noises as it settles, or little appliances and whatnot can just creak or pop at night. I get that people do weird things when they're sleeping, maybe even talking to me or somehow getting my attention. But as a kid, I thought that monsters, like what's shown in Skinamarink, was a real threat. And what we see in that movie, minus the gore, I suppose, but the little things happening around the house and eventually the appearance of the entity, feels like a fulfillment of what I feared most as a kid. But yeah, basically, I think everyone has a story like the one I just told. Maybe not about sleepwalking, but at some point you did get really, really scared in bed or whatever late at night. Either a noise, maybe your pet's acting up, or somebody doing something you just didn't expect. Something where your imagination bled into the stimuli of reality. Whatever that is for you, Skinamarink presents what it might be like if those things were real. Specifically with the sleepwalking. The visuals in this movie perfectly encapsulate how I felt when I would, for example, wake up standing after sleepwalking. Kind of just milling about my dark house and not understanding what was going on. Seeing Skinamarink was the first time in ages I actually thought about some of those memories because it showed them so well. I'm willing to bet that some of you guys watching this video right now still have a massive problem with sleep, maybe having nightmares or you sleepwalk or whatever. If that's the case, you're really going to love today's sponsor.
This video is brought to you by Manta Sleep. As a YouTuber, I have a bit of an unorthodox sleep schedule sometimes. But with the amount of stuff I'm working on, when it is time to rest, it's important that I get as cozy as possible as quickly as possible and fall asleep. But as you may know, that isn't always easy to do. Manta Sleep's Pro Nap movement empowers people to get their best sleep so that they can do their best work. They recognize that lots of people's workflows, like mine and probably yours, run smoothly when we're energized. For that reason, they have created a variety of masks which can help you sleep comfortably. I myself have been using the sound mask for the past few nights, because I like to listen to scary stories when I sleep. The Bluetooth headphones are insanely comfortable, and you don't feel them the way you might feel a traditional headset or headphones. They feel very well built and sturdy, and they're super comfortable, so you don't have to worry about them when you're tossing and turning at night. I've also tried their white noise machine, which is super customizable. They have all sorts of different masks which meet different needs, including warming or cooling your face, whatever you prefer. If you're interested in joining the Pro Nap movement and getting a mask yourself, you can visit the Manta Sleep website by clicking the link in the description of this video and using the code SeedButter for 10% off of your purchase. Don't delay, the hours of energy you'll have back will make it worth it. Thank you once again to Manta Sleep, and now, let's get back to the video.
Another thing I wanted to mention, and this might be a little bit of a reach, but did any of you guys have fever dreams growing up? Or to be more specific, fever nightmares? When I got sick as a little kid, I often had nightmares. Either fever dreams, like I mentioned, or if I took Benadryl or NyQuil before bed, or if, God forbid, I went to an urgent care and got like actual prescription strength cold medication, I had terrible nightmares. Taking any drugs whatsoever as a little kid gave me visceral dreams. And I've looked into it at a very basic level. I'm not a pharmacist, but I could show a bunch of papers that at least scratch the surface of this idea that giving kids normal, safe medicine like this can make them extremely anxious and scared. Literally, abnormal dreams are often a written side effect of some of these drugs. Again, as an adult, these things are all under control. I don't get sick as much as I used to because I'm not in a classroom with a bunch of snotty kids where we all get sick once or twice a year. And even if I do, if I take some medicine, I don't really get as anxious as I once did. I made the point that in the film, Kevin sounds a little bit stuffy. Of course, I could be making that up. I don't have a kid, but I just felt that way. Now, even if he isn't sick, he is hurt, and he was taken to an urgent care where they may have given him some medicine for his head or something. Even without that, he might be lightly concussed or just anxious from a hospital trip. So, all of what I said still kind of stands. As a kid, those feelings that medicine would give me were so foreign, and I never really knew how to react to them. And like I mentioned, they would influence my dreams and nightmares. Watching Skinamarink made me remember how I felt waking up at 3 a.m., sick as a dog, wanting water, but too scared to go out of my door because of a nightmare I just had. Uh, Convoluted point, but what I'm getting at is medicine and being sick as a kid can really mess with your dreams, your imagination, and your own personal anxiety. Stress and confusion play into it too. If you break your arm and you're given some medicine, that's the first time you've ever broke your arm. You don't understand what's going to happen about it. When you throw medicine into that already stressful situation, you might be getting night terrors or messing with your own personal sleepwalking or, issues you already have. Because of my personal experience, that was something I picked up on when I watched Skinamarink. Like, I just thought emergency room, and I thought of that happening to me when I was a little kid. Let me know if you guys ever experienced something like that, or if you have a memory similar to what I've been talking about. This is a tiny one, but I thought of it last minute and I just had to throw it in here. Do any of you guys remember being blind for like a whole year? I wear contacts, but before that, I wore glasses. When I was in third grade, I basically could not see the whiteboard, like at all, and I just thought like, okay, like that is life. That is how one goes about life. Is you can't see the whiteboard. And then eventually one day, my teacher picked up on it somehow, told my mom, went to the eye doctor, and I got glasses. But my dumb ass spent like at least a month not seeing anything that was further than 2 feet away from my face. I've heard similar enough stories from my friends about that sort of thing happening, and I kind of felt that the visuals in Skinamarink touched on that a little bit, especially the final reveal with the quote unquote creature that we can't make out at all. It kind of reminded me of what it was like to walk around my house at night without my glasses on and just not discern any object. That kind of thing scared me as a kid in particular because lots of things that look suspiciously like a person, maybe you've thrown a t shirt over a chair and it looks like a torso, were a lot worse when I couldn't see in focus. Maybe that's something some of you guys resonate with. Again, you'll have to let me know if I'm onto something. Now, the next and probably biggest undertone of Skinamarink that it really looks like the children are experiencing, which I don't myself relate to at all, is family separation. Skinamarink makes a very big deal about the mom and dad not being together. Kaylee only sees her mom in a supernatural context. Kevin doesn't even see her at all. Whereas the dad is at least presented like a normal person in the beginning. The dad calls someone, and my little point about Kevin calling someone before he calls 911 doesn't confirm whether the mom is, say, in rehab or just separated, or maybe the mom's even off for a few months taking care of her parents or something. We don't know why they're separated, but we can be pretty certain that they are. This theme has led to some theories about the movie that I don't personally agree with that suggest that there's some sort of abuse happening in the house or that one parent killed the other, maybe even abused them. Some people basically say that the whole movie is how Kevin and Kaylee are interpreting their dad killing their mom, and that's why the mom doesn't show up. Now, I personally don't have any reason to suspect domestic violence in the movie. I mean, obviously, we don't know, but the parents, when they are seen, especially the dad, are painted in a pretty positive light. Obviously, the mom could have done something wrong, but dad at least is presented as a very safe and trustworthy figure that the kids seem to really get along with in the limited interactions we see. I don't think, for example, either parent is a villain. So for now, let's be simple and just call it divorce. It is not a revolutionary thing for me to say that divorce is very frightening for children and can cause them to be very anxious, scared, and confused. And like I said, I can't relate to this personally, but divorce would just exasperate all of these issues I've talked about. I mean, I just imagine that if all of these things were happening, if I were having nightmares, if I were hurt as a child, if I were just walking around my house at 4 a.m., but my parents didn't love each other anymore, it would be worse. Everything would just be a little bit worse. Beyond the emotional aspects of it, there's also some physical, quantifiable things that might change if your parents get divorced. For example, you might be unsupervised more, and the older sibling might have to take on a bigger role in terms of taking care of the other ones, if there are multiple kids. Your parents might sell the house and move into separate apartments. And then, just after you finally got used to all the creepy corners in your own basement or attic or bedroom, you're thrown into a set of different ones with a new environment that creeps you out even more than the previous. I'd really like to hear if there's any of you that have divorced parents and you went through this when you were maybe 5 or 6 and you're willing to talk about it, if you did feel more anxious or scared as a child. Again, I'm picking at something I haven't experienced, so I'm kind of just making it up as I go. But this just stood out to me as a potential thing to bring up. The reason I talked about those real life things is because I just wanted to hammer at the point that I think Skinamarink digs at things we've all experienced. A lot of horror movies are scary and they show you things that you've never ever seen, quite frankly, because they're not real. But Skinamarink is terrifying because it's familiar. You've already been in these rooms. You've already frantically looked for your parents just like Kevin and Kaylee. You've already heard things. You've already imagined monsters, even if you couldn't really see them. All of these things you experienced were similar to what Kaylee and Kevin go through. And the items I mentioned, from family problems to sickness to not being able to see, or sleepwalking or nightmares or whatever, probably amplified those feelings you had. I might be wrong, and this might only be a personal connection that just I have, but I'm willing to bet that a lot of people feel similar, or a lot of you experience what I described as well. Skinamarink is very polarizing. Usually, people either love it or despise it, and I understand why. I myself am a bit of a normie when it comes to films. I don't usually watch experimental or indie stuff, so I understand if this didn't click for you. But I'm willing to bet that if you are one of the people who like this movie, and better yet, were scared by it, that you've probably experienced at least some of the things that I've mentioned. So I promised this earlier, but as a wrap up or reward, I guess, for listening to all of this, I want to talk about these theories and tell you which one I believe. A lot of you probably are wondering what the hell happened in Skinamarink, and unfortunately, I cannot tell you. However, there are 10 or so plausible things, and you sort of get to pick which is the most plausible to you. So let's get into that. First, let's talk about the big stuff. The main debate over what's happening in Skinamarink is whether or not there is a real horror entity, creature, demon, or whatnot in the house terrorizing the family, or if the situation is somehow symbolic. Generally, in my analysis of what people are saying online, people tend to fall into one of three camps. One says that, yes, there is a demon and all of this is real. The second is that Kevin is in a coma for 571 days, and the events of the film document how he dreams about his own home as his brain slowly deteriorates, and eventually his family pulls the plug. The third suggests that nobody is in a coma, but the kids are so stressed and terrified over real life circumstances that we are sort of seeing their imaginations when they're home alone. If the plot is to be believed, and Kevin is a reliable narrator, doors obviously wouldn't just disappear. There would obviously be some sort of supernatural explanation. The 571 days text explains just how long the demon has been torturing this family. And he is this faceless thing at the end of the movie. He's real, and so is the voice. Whether or not there is a demon or creature isn't something that can be argued as much as whether or not Kevin being a reliable narrator can. If what we are seeing from Kevin is real, so is the creature. There's no other feasible explanation for what we see. If you believe that he's in a coma, the 571-day thing also makes sense. It could be how long he's been trapped in his own body. The beginning of the film that shows Kevin hit his head is really emphasized. It's some of the only real, normal human plot that we see. So our attention is called to this, and it sort of fits in with the film's theme of being trapped. Just as the doors of the outside world are shut, so do shut the doors to Kevin experiencing real life. As he slowly dies, the world gets worse and worse, and eventually he can't remember faces, which is why the film ends with this humanoid, faceless figure. His memories have been corrupted, and he is slowly losing sanity, forgetting even what his own sister looks like. The main issue I have with this is that you can very clearly see the dad say he's okay, and that he just has a little bump on his head. You could argue that Kevin just came up with this as a way to remain positive in his own torment, But I think that too is a massive stretch. I don't think a child would comprehend a coma at all. I think he'd just react to what his brain did to him. I don't think we can imagine Kevin as the architect of his own reality. He'd probably just be along for the ride. The last way to look at Skinamarink is that none of this is real, and the kids are just having a rough go at it because of what's happening in their lives. This most likely stems from the parents separating or their mother otherwise going away. I cite the call at the beginning of the film as evidence that it's a divorce, but there is a scarier possibility. There's a line in the movie where Kevin asks about mom, and Kaylee says that she doesn't want to talk about her. Specifically, Kevin asks if dad went with mom, and Kaylee shuts down the line of conversation. We know that Kaylee is 6 years old and that Kevin is 4. Generally, we, and by we I mean psychologists, think that kids begin to process death from the ages of 5 to 7. And while there are, of course, exceptions to this, the idea persists that Kaylee might understand what's going on and Kevin does not. Furthermore, Kaylee was the only one to actually see her mom. Kevin never actually encounters her. What if the mother died and Kevin just doesn't quite get it? He's still scared, he's still unhappy, but he's not grieving. All he knows is that his mom is gone. If the mom died, she probably killed herself. I believe the closet scene would be a metaphor for the mother hanging herself, hence the bone snapping. There's also the shot of a hanging doll, which is once again only seen by Kaylee. I don't personally believe the mom died. I'll tell you what I believe in a minute. But honestly, if the mom did die, I think her having taken her own life is the most feasible explanation. The details in the closet and a hanging female doll, both only seen by Kaylee, are pretty damning pieces of evidence. If this isn't a literal film and these are nightmares and or bits and pieces of a kid's imagination, this is why she had a nightmare about her mother and Kevin didn't. That's why she can't bear to talk about mom, but Kevin can. If this were what happened, I'd wager that the dad called his in-laws because after the death of their daughter, they'd be very on edge and would want updates about their grandkids. Or just the whole family might have grown closer together in the face of a horrible loss. If that's the case, like I suggested, the whole film might be a collection of nightmares that the kids are having. Or maybe they're spending more time at home alone because their dad has to work and they otherwise don't have as much supervision given the loss of their mother. Tragically, that might also be why no one answers the phone when Kevin calls someone. He might be reaching out to his mom, who just isn't there. Okay, so generally, that covers about 90% of what the film is probably about. You can suggest that the film is really all just metaphorical and nightmares, but that Kevin really did hit his head and his parents really did get divorced. Or the parents aren't divorced, but the mom is on a work trip and the creature is real. Whatever you want to take from what I just said is up to you. The other 10% of theories are a bit more outlandish, in my opinion. The aforementioned abusive dad idea exists. Some people say that in his tone, he's basically indifferent to Kevin being hurt.
So he's fine, but Kevin fell down the stairs and hit his head.
I personally thought he sounded super caring, and that's just how men talk about things like that. So I don't personally think he's mean or acting like wrong to the kids at all. Others suggest that the dialogue that the creature uses specifically mentions power dynamics. He says he can do anything he wants and he puts the kids in these horrible situations, which pushes analysis towards discussion of child abuse. But personally, I take that as a stretch. Some people have even suggested that Kevin is the monster and that this is all happening from his perspective. They allege that he has somehow been granted supernatural powers It just decided to make like hell. um, there's actually a Twilight Zone episode about that, where a kid does that and like constructs his own micro reality and makes everybody his slaves. Once again, I find that unlikely because Kevin is cooked. Like Kevin is not having a good time in this movie. I don't know why he'd do that to himself if he was in control. So, uh, if any of you believe that, I'd like to hear why, but I just don't personally find it super likely. Another thing that I think is interesting is people suggest the entire family died and they're in limbo. If this is to be believed, the shot of the dollhouse in the end is emblematic of that. You could sort of look at this gray color palette and see the whole house suspended in the middle of nothing. At the end of the movie, we see shots of a door, which one could see as the passageway to heaven or hell, and the family is still stuck before that gate. They could have all died in like a murder suicide type of thing. And depending on the depiction of limbo, the point is usually to sort of work through something or have some change before you end up at your final destination. Maybe it's that. Once more, I don't buy this. I don't think Skinamarink is a religious film. Other people suggest that the mom was an abuser, that she may have even hurt or killed both the kids and her husband. That would explain why Kaylee doesn't want to talk about her, and why there's this interesting attention to detail when Kevin is being tortured outwardly and bleeding, he screams, "Mommy." Not only is it subtitled, but it's subtitled in this unique way, maybe suggesting that there's something different about this specific instance. So if those things aren't true, what did happen? And this drives me crazy because I literally theorize on small bits of horror to work. It's my job, and I don't have an answer. We have to just guess. We have to get as close as we can. The director gives us a million ingredients, but we have to come up with a recipe. My opinion is this. I think the parents are divorced. The stress that the family then went through caused a blight of sorts, of negativity and bad emotions. This attracted the attention of a real demon named Skinamarink, who is now torturing the children. I think it waited for the perfect moment to start this and decided that Kevin hitting his head was his showtime. Why? Just to inflict pain. The only depictions we have of this antagonist show him as a sadist who enjoys hurting the children. I believe he's put the family into a separate, non Euclidean pocket dimension where he tortures them in the house. The dad is probably going through his own thing, the same as the kids, and they're all probably just in their own individual hells. I do think the name itself can be taken as a piece of evidence for this. I mentioned at the beginning of the movie how it's sort of just unnatural and creepy with that hard K sound. It doesn't sound like other words I've heard in English before. There are lots of examples of other supernatural entities in horror, such as Bagel or Pazuzu, or even the name of entire movies, like The Babadook. I believe that the 571 days refers to the length of time that this has gone on for. There exists themes of repetition here. For example, the blood appearing and disappearing. To me, this shows that the creature can inflict pain and then undo it. So that lines up with the idea of this whole hell happening for a long time. He does what he wants, undoes it, and does it again. Sort of like Am from I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream, if you're familiar with that tale. Now, it might be happening in a single instant. Obviously, if a family didn't come out of a house for over a year, the neighbors or someone would come knocking. So I think it takes place in some different reality. But I believe the themes and presentation of the antagonist make it impossible to ignore a literal supernatural entity. There's a limit to childhood imagination, even if the kids have been scared or even abused. For me, personally, I just cannot take Skinamarink to be metaphorical. I think there really is a paranormal entity at play. But I want to hear what all of you guys think. Let me know down below what your theories are, if you agree with some of the ones I mentioned, or if you have one that's entirely different. Also, I really want to know if the stories I said resonated with you all, or if I just totally missed the mark. Also, let me know if you enjoyed this random video. I don't usually discuss horror movies in detail, and I don't have plans to keep doing this. I know a lot of you guys subscribed off one of my recent icebergs, and I'm super grateful for that. Usually, that's the type of stuff I make. So if you did enjoy this, great. Maybe I'll do it again sometime. This is, of course, a Halloween special after all. As always, Patreon members enjoyed the benefit of watching this video early, so if you'd like to consider yourself among SeedButter's greatest subscribers, you can join that club by hitting the link in the description of this video. Also, if you're interested, you can click the link to join my Discord and join the community where you can discuss future videos and things I've already made. Finally, you'll see my backup channel there as well, a place where I post IRL and travel content. Even if you don't ever watch the videos on there, the best way you can say thank you to me right now is going and looking at that channel and giving it a subscribe so I can get 1,000 subs by the end of this year. I would be very grateful if you guys could help me get that channel some traction. Thank you all for stopping by. I hope you enjoy the rest of this spooky evening. I hope you get to see your family and do something fun, watch a few scary movies. But whatever you do, have a good night.